Hi everyone, we are back for chapter 6, and since Muffin is any case mostly asleep, I thought we'll just shift her into the camera with her bed. Okay, so this is her big fat bed, and can you see a little green towel wrapped there? There's a little snack for her there if she behaves herself. If she doesn't get it. Okay, so let's start. A letter from the editor. Bando was all set to slam the door shut and tear open the envelope when the postman spoke. What, Bando? No time to talk to an old friend? Bando looked up in surprise. Old friend? He said aloud, gaping at the stranger, and then suddenly he recognized the smile. Of course, this was his old friend, Postman Raja himself. But why did he look so different? Bando wondered, and then he finally realized exactly why he looked different. And then Bando collapsed into helpless laughter. There was nothing he could do. Postman Raja had worn a wig with an elaborate film star-like puff in the front. Oh, Bando was a mess. He could do nothing to stop himself from laughing, even though poor Raja stood there shuffling his feet, looking embarrassed. Finally, when Raja turned away and walked off, too hurt to even speak, Bando was able to quickly control himself. He couldn't bear to see his friend look so dejected. He caught up with Raja at the gate and apologized profusely. Finally, Raja relented with a sheepish smile and admitted, You're right, Bando. Even my wife warned me that I looked a bit silly, with the wig on. All Bando could bring himself to say was, But why, Raja? What for? Meaning, why the wig? Raja kicked a few pebbles with his foot, looked at his toes, and mumbled, You must have read the papers the other day, Bando. Everybody did. Bando froze. Before he could say anything, Raja continued, Some cartoonist did a caricature of me, a cartoon of me. I have to admit that it was rather a good one. The papers printed it along with those sketches of Kula and Ranga. So now you know why wore the wig. But then Postman Raja grinned mischievously. He reached up and pulled off his toupee. Toupee is another word for wig. And revealing his familiar bald head to Bando, Raja's restored spirits made Bando feel less guilty. He'd just been wondering whether to confess his role in this episode. And as the postman walked away, he jauntily tossed his wig in the ditch with a wink to Bando, saying, If my 2 strands of hair are what made me famous, I'd be foolish to cover them up, right? Bando shut the door and sank into the doormat, closing his eyes. It was all getting too complicated. Cartooning had seemed like such good fun and a possible way of earning more money. Bando hadn't meant to hurt anybody's feelings, least of all dear Raja's. Raja was such a good friend of his. Bando was thankful that at least when the postman had left, he'd been smiling. Then he'd remembered the letter, addressed to him no less, in an envelope from the City Times. His worries about his friend were quickly replaced by excitement, especially when he looked at the address to Mr. Bando Murthy. It read, he smiled to himself, quite sure that nobody in the newspaper office would have ever dreamt that they were addressing this letter to a dog. Mr. Bando Murthy. Doesn't sound like a dog, does it? Dear Mr. Bando Murthy, the letter read, The City Times takes great pleasure in accepting your 3 sketches. They show great originality and your choice of local personalities fits in perfectly with the unique Bangalore flavour of our paper. Enclosed is a demand draft for rupees 3,000 per cartoon. The editor would certainly welcome any more contributions you wish to make to this paper. We look forward to hearing from you. The letter was signed by the editor himself. If there'd been a TV camera crew present, maybe hidden somewhere behind the curtains, they would have shot some excellent footage of Bando's reaction. He first kissed the precious draft. Then he placed it on his head and balanced himself on 2 legs and danced around the room.
Naturally, it flew off his head and landed somewhere else. He swooped down on it and with an elaborate flourish pretended to be leaning on an imaginary bank counter, handing the draft to an imaginary clerk. "I'd like to encash this immediately, please," he said in a strange accent. "Give it to me in 100-rupee notes, if you don't mind." That went on for about 15 minutes, but you'd have to forgive poor Bando. He'd never ever earned any money in his entire life. Also, the editor's words had filled him with pride and hope. He almost fainted every time he read that bit about "shows great originality," while the editor would welcome any more contributions, made him want to go and give Mrs. Murthy a big hug. But of course, he couldn't do that. This was supposed to be a secret. Bando had decided right at the start that Mrs. Murthy was not to be worried about his experiments at money making. Okay, so there we've come to the end of chapter 6, and we've managed without giving her a snack or without me scratching her at the underside. Muffin has been a really good girl. You're a good girl. You're a very, very, very good girl now. Let's see how she scratches on you. Bye. See you next for the next chapter.